again, it's Carol with Shelby Senior Services. I, of course, do your travel. Last week we talked about Italy. My first overseas trip was to Italy. And we talked a little bit about Rome and talked about Siena and we talked about Assisi. And now I'm going to continue the trip and probably give you a little glance of southern Italy that we took a separate trip on. But right now, I wanted to talk a little bit about Perugia, and that's P-E-R-U, Peru, G-I-A, Perugia, okay? Perugia sits on, I don't know if you'd call it a mountain, but it is a very, very steep hill. And our hotel was kind of on one level, and then you had to go in a path and underneath some buildings and all, and there was an escalator that you took up to the next floor or next level, and that's where the shops were. And it's a very interesting town, and because their center area, where, you know, I talked a little bit about the central area of each city was a gathering place. Well, of course, Perugia had that too. And in the middle of the town gathering place, if you will, they have all kinds of artists and entertainers, and it was just a fun place to go. And you could spend all day just having a cup of coffee. You remember that strong coffee I talked about last week? And sit there and enjoy the sights and the people, and I think a lot of them do that. But Perugia was extremely interesting. And it's called a medieval town because it looks just like what you might see in the movies. It's called, that's the Grand Square, that's what they call it, is Piazza 4 Novembre. I don't know exactly what all that means, but it is delightful. And of course, every square, middle square like that, has this ornate church that you can go in and tour. All right, then after going to Perugia, we went to Siena, and I talked about Siena last week. And then from there, we went to Florence. Florence, Italy is at one time the center of all art, all intellectual pursuits. Florence is something else. Our bus driver, and his name was Igor, and the cutest guy you ever saw. He hardly ever spoke English. He was probably about 26, 28 years old, and just cute as a button. And he would just grin and just help us in and out the bus. And he seemed to genuinely like to drive the bus. And he was such a good driver. How he could get down these little narrow streets and turn the corners, I don't know, but he did. Anyway, enough about him. Florence is, oh my gosh, the bus driver took us up to a vista point. Of course, it's all hilly and mountainous down through there. And you could look out over the top of the Duomo, which was the dome of the center church there. Of course, all the streets, again, are very, very narrow. They use these clay-colored ceiling, or it's like a shingle, like a tile on the tops. And when you looked out over the city, you saw this golden dome, and then it was surrounded by a sea of this terracotta, beautiful roof lines. And of course, when we got to Florence, that's where we got to take a nice big walk around. And again, if you're going to go to Italy or any European area, make sure you take comfortable shoes. I'm going to read just a little bit about what we did in Florence. We drove through Tuscany. Now, I was a little unclear about if Tuscany was a town or what it was, but found out that Tuscany is an overall term for the rolling countryside of vineyards and medieval structures in central Italy. That's where you're going to get the grapes. That's where you're going to get the olives. That's where you're going to get beautiful. In fact, we stopped at a winery. They specialized in olive oil and had lunch there, which was very interesting and very good. Then we went on to Florence and we toured the beautiful city. It says, the Academy Gallery is where Michelangelo's original statue of David proudly stands. Now, the statue of David is very, very, very tall. I mean, it is gorgeous, but it is so tall. And we got fairly close up to it. Of course, there was a lot of tourists there. And you can walk all the way around the backside. And what they point out is his hands. Because of the perspective that you're kind of look at him from afar, in order for you to see his hands, they have enlarged his hands on the statue, which is, you never would have figured that at all, but it works. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful statue. The Church of Santa Croce, C-R-O-C-E, I don't know how you pronounce it. The Giotto's Bell Tower, please forgive me for mispronunciation, and baptistry also displays something that I just was fascinated with. It was called the Gates of Paradise, and this was huge, probably at least 20 foot tall, and there were double doors to get into this church, and there were panels that were gold all the way, I mean, up and down, and each panel depicted the life of Christ in pure gold. I mean, it's just breathtaking. And people, you know, clicking pictures, and I did too. I have my pictures too. So that was wonderful to see. They also, let's see, that's called the Gates of Paradise there that I was just talking about. They have a lot of art from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in Florence, because that was the highlight. That was the peak of artistry in Europe at that time. And Florence is also known for its fine leather. One of our travelers was chosen to model a coat in light blue, which fit her to a T. But of course, this coat was not cheap, so she didn't go home with it. Gold jewelry is made there too. I wrote that a lot of rings and necklaces and earrings have made their way home to Shelbyville from Florence, along with a variety of handbags and other leather items, which I brought a few little pieces like lipstick holders and things like that. I thought that'd make really good gifts. The ones that finally did go to people, the rest are still with me. Okay. Oh, and the highlight of that trip was, or that particular day, was our visit to the Carthusian Monastery just outside of Florence. It's a 14th century fortress that still houses monks who live in silence. Now, at one point, this probably held 20 or 30 monks. At the present time, well, or when we were there anyway, I think there were like maybe 5 monks that still live there. But they have no outside contact except once a year. I think it's at Christmas time their families can come and see them. But they can't talk during the day. They have a sparse living quarters that has maybe a bed, a cross over the bed, a simple table, a simple chair, and that's it. They don't have any luxuries at all. And that gives them time to pursue their prayers and intellectual passions, it says. They are supported by the church. And in order to do that, and this was kind of way up on a hill, in order to do that, they had a restaurant down at the foot of the hill, and that's where the church, like not the monks, but the priests and all, would host dinners and all, and dances for tourists that come to see this. That evening, there were probably 200 people or so that attended that. Not all of my group. I mean, I didn't have 200 people there, but we were some of them, and we were sitting all at big round tables. And the maitre d' was very funny. He was tall, and he had this long pointed nose, and right away we all looked at him and said, "Oh my gosh, he looks like the main character in Despicable Me." If you've not seen that movie, it's a kid's movie. We all kind of looked at him, and he was standing board straight, and he'd bark orders once in a while and walk around, and he had his arms behind his back, and he was just looking at her. Well, then it came time to do the dancing. He comes over to our table, and he looks at one of the little gals and goes like this to her, and she said, "Me, and come here." So she's my height, and I'm very short, and he's way over 6 foot tall. And he leans over and he's dancing with her, and pretty soon boyfriend doesn't like that, so he gets up and he goes and cuts in. And it was so funny because Despicable Me guy, whatever his name was, he was so funny. But anyway, that was a fun time. And of course, as with all the meals, we had a bucket of wine, white wine, red wine, if free flowed, and then you, if you wanted water, you had to buy that. I thought that was so funny. All over Europe. Okay. From there, from Florence, we went to Venice. Venice. Oh my goodness. The day we got there, it was storming, and the rain was just coming down in sheets, and it was blowing. We parked the bus, and then we had to take this tram into Venice because there's no motorized vehicles in Venice. So you get on the tram, and you come to the edge of Venice, and then you have to walk. Now, each of us was pulling an overnight bag or carrying it or whatever. But as we sat on the tram, waiting to be dismissed from the tram to get walking, we had to wait because the wind was so bad, and these trams, the little cars, were just going like this, and we're thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to blow us right off the track. It didn't, and finally it kind of subsided, and we were allowed. But again, make sure you have comfortable shoes, because you're going up the steps and across the bridge and down the steps on the other side. And we were right in the heart of Venice, staying in a wonderful hotel. You were free to go and explore. The Rialto Bridge is famous there. Let's see what else. What else is there? We took a boat. The whole group took a boat to the Murano Island, which is very nearby, and that's where they do the glass blowing, the expensive glass blowing. We were given a demonstration, of course, and the display area is just, these crystal chandeliers hanging down. And I have seen some of those crystal chandeliers in other buildings and all, and they are just magnificent. The nice thing about it is you could ship it home. You didn't have to carry these things, and they offered specials and all like that. The reason that they do this away from the island of Venice is because they used to be so flammable. These glass blowing places, of course, have hot air or flames that they soften the glass in, and they would catch fire, and sometimes they'd have big fires and destroy a lot of property. So they kind of pushed all of those to other islands nearby. So that's why you had to take a boat to go there. And of course, the highlight of the Venice trip were the gondolas. We had 6 gondolas going with our group, and right in the middle, and they were kind of almost tied to each other because they were just right next to each other. In the middle gondola was a guy who was playing the accordion and singing, and oh my gosh, you talk about romantic. That was so fun. It was a little chilly that day. We all had our coats on, but that's all right. We got to experience a gondola in Venice. What a wonderful experience that was. Somebody in my group said the gondola ride was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and it was just gorgeous. We also went to St. Mark's Square, which is where the Doge's house is, which is just, he was like the mayor of Venice, and he lived very well, let me tell you. And then you also got to cross over the Bridge of Sighs, and what it was, it's like a little bridge between these two buildings, and it's not down on street level, if you will, because there are no streets, but it was way up there, and these prisoners, after being convicted of whatever they were convicted of, had to walk across this bridge, and it had just narrow slits of windows in it, and as they walked by, they could see their last glimpse of Venice as they were taken to their jail cells, probably never to see anything like that again because they died usually in prison. But that was kind of a neat thing. We saw the clock tower. Let's see. Then we left Venice, and we headed north to Switzerland and Lugano, where the Alps began. And we got to take a ride on Lake Como in Italy. It was an afternoon of cruising the lake, and we looked for George Clooney, who has a villa there. But alas, he must have had another commitment because we never did get to see him. From there, we went to Milan, and we flew home from Milan. Wonderful, wonderful trip. I'm not going to get to southern Italy this time. I will next time. Have a great day. Bye.